All right, English learners, get ready. We're going deep today into advanced English fluency.
Yeah, we're talking idioms and expressions and all those tricky grammar points.
It's all about sounding natural and confident, like you've been speaking English forever.
Exactly. It's time to go beyond those textbook basics and see how native speakers use the language, in the real world.
And for this deep dive, we've got two awesome sources.
Oh, yeah?
We're looking at this guide called Work on Your Phrasal Verbs, which pretty much does what it says.
Straightforward. I like it.
And we've also got an episode from the English Learning Podcast, specifically for advanced learners like you.
Sounds like we've got a lot to unpack.
We do. So let's just jump right in. Our phrasal verb guide, Work on Your Phrasal Verbs.
Okay.
It points out just how many phrasal verbs are out there, especially when it comes to planning and organizing things.
Yeah, and that's where it gets tricky, right? Phrasal verbs can be really tough for English learners because the meaning isn't always clear from the individual words.
Right, you can't just translate them word for word.
Yeah.
For example, the guide gives us the phrasal verb, end up.
Okay.
They use the example, we could end up with millions of unemployed people. So it's not just about arriving at a destination.
Right, it's about the consequences, not just the end point.
Exactly.
And that's why context is so important with phrasal verbs.
So true. The guide also mentions fit in.
Okay.
And they talk about how it's not just physically fitting into a space,
Yeah.
but also like fitting tasks into your schedule.
Exactly, like squeezing something into your already busy day.
So true. And then there's wind up.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, this one's a bit of a chameleon. The guide says it can mean to finish something, to tighten something like a clock, or even to find yourself in a situation, often unexpectedly.
Wow, that's a lot of meanings for one little phrasal verb.
It is.
It really shows how important it is to pay attention to the context to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about our podcast source, English Learning Podcast,
All right.
which dives headfirst into the world of idioms.
Love it.
And they really emphasize how important idioms are for understanding the culture.
Oh, absolutely. It's about going beyond just knowing the words and the grammar and really understanding the culture, the nuances of the language.
It's about getting those subtle cultural references that native speakers use.
Exactly.
The podcast gives the example of hitting the nail on the head.
Which means to say or do something perfectly right.
Exactly.
It's like you nailed it. You got it perfectly.
It's that aha moment when it all clicks.
Exactly.
Now, the podcast also points out that you have to be careful with idioms.
Oh, yeah.
Because using the wrong one at the wrong time can lead to some pretty awkward situations.
Absolutely.
Like imagine if you told someone you burned the midnight oil. Literally.
Oh my gosh.
They'd probably think you set your house on fire.
Right. Context is everything.
So the podcast explains that burn the midnight oil actually means to work late into the night.
Exactly.
And then there's throw in the towel.
Which means to give up, to admit defeat.
I think we've all been there.
We have, especially when it comes to learning English idioms.
Okay. So the podcast also talks about a blessing in disguise.
Ooh, I like that one.
What's that all about?
It refers to a situation that seems bad at first,
Okay.
but actually turns out to have a positive outcome.
Oh, so it's like a hidden opportunity.
Exactly. Like something good that comes out of something that seemed bad at first.
That's a good way to look at it.
Oh.
Now, the English Learning Podcast has this really fun interactive idiom challenge
Oh, fine.
where they give you a sentence and you have to guess the correct idiom.
I love those.
Do you want to try a few?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. Here's the first one. When Sarah realized she forgot her passport, it was. Take a moment to think about it. What idiom would fit best there?
Well, forgetting your passport sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
But maybe it prevented her from getting on a flight that ended up having problems. So the answer is a blessing in disguise.
That's a great point. You never know what might have happened if she had made that flight.
Okay.
Ready for another one?
Yeah, bring it on.
All right. After staying up all night to finish the project, James. Think about what James did and see if you can guess the idiom.
Sounds like James definitely burned the midnight oil to get that project done.
You got it. He was burning that metaphorical midnight oil, not the actual one. All right. The last one. After months of trying to learn that difficult phrasal verb, I finally. What idiom completes this sentence?
Well, if you're giving up after months of trying, it sounds like you've thrown in the towel.
You got it. Sometimes it's okay to admit defeat and move on to something else.
Exactly.
These idiom challenges are such a fun way to test our knowledge and to see how these expressions work in real sentences.
They are.
But now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about grammar.
Okay.
Our podcast source also covers those commonly confused verbs rise and raise.
Oh, yeah. Those two can be tricky,
Okay.
even for advanced learners.
But the distinction is actually quite simple.
It is.
Rise is what we call intransitive,
Mm,
meaning it doesn't take an object.
right.
For example, the sun rises in the east, or
Mhm.
prices are rising.
Exactly.
So rise describes something happening on its own without any external force.
And raise is transitive, meaning it does take an object.
Right, like he raised his hand to ask a question, or the company raised its prices.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in these examples, someone or something is actively doing the raising.
Exactly. Okay, let's do a quick grammar exercise to really solidify this.
I like this.
I'm going to give you a sentence with a blank, and you tell me whether we should use rise or raise. Ready?
Ready? Let's do it.
Okay, here's the first one. The balloon slowly into the sky.
That would be rose. The balloon is doing the action on its own.
You got it. Okay, here's the second one. The government is planning to tax us.
Ah, in this case, it would be raise because the government is taking the action of raising taxes.
You nailed it. It's
Nice.
all about figuring out who or what is performing the action.
Right?
See, grammar can be fun.
Absolutely. And understanding these little nuances can make a big difference in your fluency.
It really can.
Okay.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in the world of advanced English.
So much more.
Stay tuned, because in part 2, we're going to delve even deeper into phrasal verbs, idioms, and those everyday expressions that can really take your English to the next level.
Can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into advanced English fluency. Picking up right where we left off with those phrasal verbs and idioms and expressions.
We're ready for more. So what other treasures are hidden in that Work on Your Phrasal Verbs guide?
Okay, let's see. Well, there's follow-up. It means to take further action or find out more about something after an initial action.
Oh, so like if you have a job interview, you might follow up with the interviewer afterwards.
Exactly. It shows you're still interested and keeps the conversation going. Another good one is go about, which means to start dealing with a task or a problem.
So it's about finding the right way to approach something.
Exactly. Like if you're learning a new language, you need to figure out a method that works for you and go about it systematically.
That makes sense.
What else? Let's see. Oh, line up. It means to arrange something or someone in preparation for an event.
Okay, so like lining up speakers for a conference.
Yeah. Or musicians for a concert. You're putting things in order and getting everything ready.
Right. It's all about organization. Those phrasal verbs are like building blocks. They add more complexity and nuance to our language.
I like that analogy. And the more building blocks we have, the more interesting and expressive we can be. Speaking of interesting, our English learning podcast does a great job of explaining idioms.
They do. And they talk about how idioms aren't just about memorizing phrases.
Right. It's about understanding the culture and using them in the right way.
It's like unlocking a secret code.
Yeah,
It helps you understand the language and the culture on a deeper level.
exactly.
The podcast uses the example of hitting the nail on the head.
Ah, yes. Which means to do or say something exactly right.
It's that aha moment when you finally understand something.
Exactly. You nailed it.
Now, the podcast also points out that idioms can have multiple meanings.
Yeah, they can be tricky like that.
They give the example of pull off. It can mean to succeed in doing something difficult.
Like, they pulled off an incredible victory.
Right. But it can also mean to drive a vehicle off a road.
Like, he pulled off the highway to get gas.
Exactly. So the context is really important. There's also rule out, which means to decide that something is impossible.
Oh, so if you're trying to solve a problem, you might rule out certain solutions because they just won't work.
Exactly. You're eliminating possibilities.
Okay, and what about run into?
Run into means to unexpectedly encounter problems.
Oh, like, we ran into some technical difficulties during the presentation.
Exactly. It's about those unexpected obstacles that pop up.
Life is full of those. It's clear that idioms add a lot of color and personality to the language.
They do. But like anything else, you have to use them carefully.
Now let's go back to those tricky verbs, rise and raise.
Okay?
It's so easy to get them mixed up.
It is. Remember, rise is intransitive, so it doesn't need an object. But raise is transitive, and it does need an object.
Right. It's like the difference between the sun rising and someone raising their hand. Exactly. The sun rises on its own, but someone has to raise their hand.
Our English Learning Podcast also gave some great examples of those everyday expressions that native speakers use all the time.
Oh, those are so important. They may seem simple, but they're key to sounding natural and fluent.
Like the expression, to be worth it. It means that something is valuable or worthwhile.
Like, that concert was expensive, but it was worth it.
Right. And then there's to feel like.
Which is a way to talk about what you want to do.
Exactly. Like, I feel like going for a walk, or I don't feel like cooking tonight.
Perfect examples. Those expressions are everywhere in English.
So it's really important to learn them and practice using them.
The more you hear and use authentic English, the better you'll get at using these expressions.
Exactly. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into advanced English fluency. We've covered so much already.
We have, but there's still a little bit more to explore.
Definitely. Speaking of exploring, remember that phrasal verb wind up we talked about earlier?
From work on your phrasal verbs.
Yeah, it had all those different meanings.
It did. Which one are you thinking about?
The one about finding yourself in a situation, often unexpectedly. It really got me thinking about how learning English can be such an unpredictable journey.
I see what you mean. It's like you never know where you'll end up.
Right. I never thought I'd be hosting a podcast about English.
It's funny how things work out. Sometimes those unexpected turns lead to the most amazing experiences.
Exactly. It's like those times when you discover a new word or a new expression, and it completely changes your understanding of the language.
It's like a whole new world opens up, and you see things in a different way.
Speaking of new discoveries, our English learning podcast also pointed out some simple but really powerful everyday expressions.
Oh yeah, those are so important, even though they seem small.
Right, like slam the door.
Yeah, it's such a vivid way to describe anger or frustration.
It is. It creates such a strong image in your mind. And then there's I wonder.
Which is such a simple way to express curiosity.
It is. And it invites other people to think about it too.
It's a great way to start a conversation.
Okay. And what about how come?
That's a more casual way to ask why.
Right. It's less formal. More like everyday conversation.
Exactly. It's all about those little nuances that make your English sound more natural.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about phrasal verbs, idioms, grammar, and those everyday expressions.
And through it all, we've seen that advanced English fluency is about so much more than just memorizing rules.
It really is. It's about understanding the culture and using language in a way that feels authentic.
And don't forget about having fun with it.
Absolutely. Learning English should be enjoyable.
It should be.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to keep exploring the world of English.
Yes. Don't be afraid to try new things. Make mistakes. Learn from them. And enjoy the journey.
Fluency is a process, not a destination. So keep practicing, keep learning, and keep having fun with it.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll wind up hosting your own English podcast.
That's a great goal to have. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into advanced English fluency. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today on English Learning Podcast. I want to congratulate you for taking the time to improve your English. Every step counts, so keep moving forward and don't stop. If you enjoyed this content and want to learn more, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button so we can keep creating videos like this. Let us know in the comments what level of English you're at and what topics you'd like us to cover in the next episode. Also, check out the links in the description for additional resources to help you keep advancing. See you in the next video. And remember, English Learning Podcast is here to help you reach your English goals. Keep learning.